Hello, this is Brian, and for the next hour, I'll be reading from the February 3rd issue of the Toronto Star on the Niagara Frontier radio reading service. An internal document shows the Vietnamese military preparing for a possible American war. A year after Vietnam elevated its relations with Washington to the highest diplomatic level, an internal document shows its military was taking steps to prepare for a possible American war of aggression and considered the United States a belligerent power, according to a report released Tuesday. More than just exposing Hanoi's duality in approach toward the U.S., the document confirms a deep-seated fear of external forces fomenting an uprising against the communist leadership in a so-called color revolution, like the 2004 Orange Revolution in Ukraine or the 1986 Yellow Revolution in the Philippines. Other internal documents that the 88 Project, a human rights organization focused on human rights abuses in Vietnam, cited in its analysis point to similar concerns over U.S. motives in Vietnam. There is a consensus here across the government and across different ministries, said Ben Swanton, co-director of the 88 Project and the report's author. This isn't just some kind of a fringe element or paranoid element within the party or within the government. The Second U.S. Invasion Plan. The original Vietnamese document titled The Second U.S. Invasion Plan was completed by the Ministry of Defense in August 2024. It suggests that in seeking its objective of strengthening deterrence against China, the U.S. and its allies are ready to apply unconventional forms of warfare and military intervention and even conduct large-scale invasions against countries and territories that deviate from its orbit. While noting that currently there is little risk of a war against Vietnam, the Vietnamese planners write that, due to the U.S.'s belligerent nature, we need to be vigilant to prevent the U.S. and its allies from creating a pretext to launch an invasion of our country. The Vietnamese military analysts outline what they see as a progression over 3 American administrations, from Barack Obama through Donald Trump's first term and into Joe Biden's presidency, with Washington increasingly pursuing military and other relationships with Asian nations to form a front against China. Vietnam balances diplomatic outreach with internal fears. In his term, Biden in 2023 signed a comprehensive strategic partnership with Vietnam, elevating relations between the nations to their highest diplomatic level on par with Russia and China as trusted partners with a friendship grounded in mutual respect. In the 2024 military document, however, Vietnamese planners said that while the U.S. views Vietnam as a partner and an important link, it also wants to spread and impose its values regarding freedom, democracy, human rights, ethnicity, and religion to gradually change the country's socialist government. The Second U.S. Invasion Plan provides one of the most clear-eyed insights yet into Vietnam's foreign policy, Swanton wrote in his analysis. It shows that far from viewing the U.S. as a strategic partner, Hanoi sees Washington as an existential threat and has no intention of joining its anti-China alliance. Vietnam's foreign ministry did not answer emails seeking comment on the 88 Project report or the document it highlighted. The U.S. State Department refused to comment directly on the second U.S. invasion, but stressed the new partnership agreement, saying it promotes prosperity and security for the United States and Vietnam. A strong, prosperous, independent, and resilient Vietnam benefits our two countries and helps ensure that the Indo-Pacific remains stable, secure, free, and open, the State Department said. Documents offer a window into internal thinking. Win Kok Ying of Singapore's ISEAS Yusof Ishak Institute Research Center said the plans highlighted tensions within Vietnam's political leadership, where the Communist Party's conservative, military-aligned faction has long been preoccupied with external threats to the regime. The military has never been too comfortable moving ahead with the comprehensive strategic partnership with the United States, Yang said. Tensions within the government spilled into the public realm in June 2024 when U.S.-linked Fulbright University was accused of fomenting a color revolution by an Army TV report. The Foreign Ministry defended the university, which U.S. and Vietnamese officials had highlighted when the two countries upgraded ties. Zachary Abuza, a professor at the National War College in Washington, said the Vietnamese military still has a very long memory of the war with the U.S. that ended in 1975. While Western diplomats have tended to see Hanoi as most concerned by possible Chinese aggression, the document reinforces other policy papers suggesting leaders' biggest fear is that of a color revolution, he said. Further undermining trust between the U.S. and Vietnam were cuts made to the U.S. Agency for International Development by President Donald Trump's administration, which disrupted projects such as efforts to clean up tons of soil contaminated with deadly dioxin from the military's Agent Orange defoliant and unexploded American munitions and landmines. This pervasive insecurity about color revolutions is very frustrating because I don't see why the Communist Party is so insecure, said Abuza, whose book, The Vietnam People's Army, From People's Warfare to Military Modernization, was published last year. They have so much to be proud of. They have lifted so many people out of poverty. The economy is humming along. They are the darling of foreign investors. While China and Vietnam have been at odds over territorial claims in the South China Sea, the documents portray China more as a regional rival than a threat like the U.S. China doesn't pose an existential threat to the Communist Party of Vietnam, Abuza said. Indeed, the Chinese know they can only push the Vietnamese so far because they're fearful that the Communist Party can't respond forcefully to China and will look weak and it will cause a mass uprising. China is Vietnam's largest two-way trade partner, while the U.S. is its largest export market, meaning Hanoi needs to perform a balancing act in keeping up diplomatic and economic ties while also hedging its bets. Even some of the more progressive leaders look at the United States saying, yes, they like us, they're working with us, they are good partners for now, but given the opportunity, if there were a color revolution, the Americans would support it, Abuza said. Trump's second administration softens some concerns, but raises more. Under Vietnamese leader To Lam, who became Communist Party General Secretary at around the same time the document was written, the country has moved to strengthen ties with the U.S., especially under Trump, Yang said. Lam was reappointed General Secretary last month and is expected to also assume the presidency, which would make him the country's most powerful figure in decades. With Lam at the helm, Trump's family business has broken ground on a $1.5 billion Trump-branded golf resort and luxury real estate project in northern Hưng Yên province. The Vietnamese leader almost immediately accepted Trump's invitation to join the Board of Peace, which Yang said was an unusually swift decision, given that foreign policy moves are typically calibrated with close attention to Beijing's possible reaction. But Trump's military operation to capture former Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro have given Vietnamese conservatives fresh justification for their unease about closer ties with Washington. Any U.S. military action involving Hanoi's ally, Cuba, could upset Vietnam's strategic balance, Yang added. Cuba is very sensitive, he said. If something happens in Cuba, it will send shock waves through Vietnam's political elites. Many of them have very strong, intimate ties with Cuba. Overall, the first year of Trump's second term is likely to have left the Vietnamese happy about the focus on the Western Hemisphere, but wondering about other developments, Abuza said. The Vietnamese are going to be confused by the Trump administration, which has downplayed human rights and democracy promotion, but at the same time been willing to violate the sovereignty of states and remove leaders they don't like, he said. Alabama man faces execution despite not pulling the trigger in auto store customer's death. Charles Sonny Burton didn't kill anyone. The state of Alabama could execute him anyway. Burton, 75, is facing execution for his role as an accomplice in the 1991 robbery at an auto parts store where customer Doug Battle was killed. No one disputes that another man, Derek DeBruce, shot and killed Battle. Burton, one of 6 men involved in the robbery, was outside the store at the time of the shooting, according to testimony. DeBruce and Burton were both sentenced to death, but DeBruce was later resentenced to life imprisonment, leaving Burton, who neither fired the gun nor ordered anyone to be killed, as the only person facing execution. Matt Schultz, Burton's attorney, said the case represents an extreme outlier among death penalty cases. The Alabama Supreme Court in January authorized Governor Kay Ivey to set an execution date for Burton using nitrogen gas. The victim's daughter and multiple jurors from his 1992 trial are now urging the governor to grant clemency, arguing the case raises fundamental questions of fairness. We hope and pray that Governor Ivey recognizes that this case slipped through the cracks. It would be wrong to execute a man who did not even see the shooting take place, after the state agreed to resentence the shooter to life without parole, and this is simply not the kind of case most people think of when they envision the death penalty being carried out, Schultz said. The murder at the AutoZone. The shooting occurred August 16, 1991, during a robbery at an AutoZone in Talladega. Before they went inside, Burton, who was 40, said if anyone caused trouble in the store, that he would take care of it, according to testimony. DeBruce yelled for everyone to get down. Burton, also armed with a gun, forced the manager to the back to open the safe. As the robbery ended, Battle, a 34-year-old Army veteran and father of 4, entered the store. He threw his wallet down, got onto the floor, and exchanged words with DeBruce. LaJuan McCants, who was 16 at the time, testified that Burton and others had left the store when DeBruce shot Battle in the back. Afterward, Burton asked DeBruce in the getaway car why he had shot the man, McCants testified. During closing arguments, a prosecutor argued Burton was just as guilty as Derek DeBruce because he's there to aid and assist him. Prosecutors pointed to the statement about handling trouble as evidence that Burton was the robbery leader. But Burton's attorneys said there is only evidence that Burton intended to participate in a robbery, not to harm anyone. A victim's plea and a juror's regret. The victim's daughter is among those urging the governor to grant clemency. Tori Battle, who was 9 when her father was killed, asked Ivey to consider extending grace to Mr. Burton and granting him clemency. My father, Doug Battle, was many things. He was strong, but he valued peace. He did not believe in revenge, she wrote in a letter to Ivey. The Associated Press was unable to reach her or other Battle family members for comment. 6 of the 8 living jurors from the 1992 trial do not object to commutation, according to the clemency petition. 3 are requesting it, saying they never would have recommended a death sentence if the shooter was getting a lesser sentence. It's absolutely not fair. You don't execute someone who did not pull the trigger, Priscilla Townsend, one of the jurors, said in a telephone interview. Townsend said they recommended the death sentence. After an extremely emotional trial, Townsend said she still believes in the death penalty for the worst of the worst, but she said that is not Burton. Attorney General Steve Marshall's office opposed the clemency request. Burton was convicted of capital murder in April 1992, and that the jury unanimously recommended the death penalty. That conviction and sentence have been upheld at every level, a spokesman for the office said. Where the Supreme Court stands, most people on death row were convicted of directly killing someone, but the U.S. Supreme Court allows execution of accomplices under certain circumstances. Robin M. Marr, executive director of the Death Penalty Information Center, said the group has documented at least 22 cases where the person executed participated in a felony during which a victim died at the hands of another participant. The U.S. Supreme Court in 1987 allowed accomplices who didn't pull the trigger to be sentenced to death if they displayed a reckless indifference for human life. Maher said that has created arbitrariness among the jurisdictions. Richard S. Jeff, an attorney not involved with Burton's case, said Alabama law requires that prosecutors show the accomplice had a particularized intent to kill. Burton's lawyers have argued that intent was never established. Clemency grants are rare in death row cases. Ivey has granted clemency once. However, Republican governors in several states have extended clemency for accomplices in murder cases. Oklahoma Governor Kevin Stitt commuted a death sentence in November. Families pleas for mercy. Burton grew up with an alcoholic father who frequently beat him, according to sentencing documents. Despite that, he became a protector for younger members of the family, his sister Eddie Mae Ellison said. Ellison said her brother is not perfect, but he is not the person depicted by prosecutors. Today, she said her brother is in a failing health. He is frail and uses a wheelchair or walker to get around outside his cell. He did not lay a hand on the man, Ellison said. Why do you feel it is necessary to take his life? You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Toronto Star on the Niagara Frontier radio reading service. Iran's president seeks fair and equitable negotiations with the United States. Iran's president said Tuesday he instructed the country's foreign minister to pursue fair and equitable negotiations with the United States. The first clear sign from Tehran it wants to try to negotiate as tensions remain high with Washington after the Mideast country's bloody crackdown on nationwide protests last month. The announcement marked a major turn for reformist President Masoud Pezeshkian, who had broadly warned Iranians for weeks that the turmoil in his country had gone beyond his control. It also signals that the president received support from Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, for talks that the 86-year-old cleric previously had dismissed. Turkey had been working behind the scenes to make the talks happen there later this week, as U.S. Mideast envoy Steve Witkoff is traveling in the region. A Turkish official later said the location of talks was uncertain, but that Turkey was ready to support the process. The official, who spoke anonymously in line with regulations, did not provide further details. Foreign ministers from Oman, Pakistan, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates have also been invited to attend the talks if they happen, according to a regional official who spoke on condition of anonymity as they did not have permission to speak to journalists. But whether Iran and the U.S. can reach an agreement remains to be seen, particularly as President Donald Trump now has included Iran's nuclear program in a list of demands from Tehran in any talks. Trump ordered the bombing of 3 Iranian nuclear sites during the 12-day war Israel launched against Iran in June. Iran's president signals talks are possible. Writing on X, Pezeshkian said in English and Farsi the decision came after requests from friendly governments in the region to respond to the proposal by the President of the United States for negotiations. I have instructed my Minister of Foreign Affairs, provided that a suitable environment exists, one free from threats and unreasonable expectations, to pursue fair and equitable negotiations guided by the principles of dignity, prudence, and expediency, he said. The U.S. has yet to acknowledge the talks will take place, a semi-official news agency in Iran on Monday reported, then later deleted without explanation, that Pezeshkian had issued such an order to Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi, who held multiple rounds of talks with Witkoff before the 12-day war. Khamenei advisor speaks on the nuclear issue. Late Monday, the pan-Arab satellite channel Al Mayadeen, which is politically allied with the Iranian-backed Lebanese militant group Hezbollah, aired an interview with Ali Shamkhani, a top Khomeini advisor on security. Shamkhani, who now sits on the country's Supreme National Security Council, and who in the 1980s led Iran's Navy, wore a naval uniform as he spoke. He suggested that if the talks happened, they would be indirect at the beginning, then move to direct talks if a deal appeared to be attainable. Direct talks with the U.S. long have been a highly charged political issue within Iran's theocracy, with reformists like Pezeshkian pushing for them and hardliners dismissing them. The talks would solely focus on nuclear issues, he added. Asked about whether Russia could take Iran's enriched uranium like it did in Tehran's 2015 nuclear deal with world powers, Shamkhani dismissed the idea, saying there was no reason to do so. Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov on Monday said Russia had long offered these services as a possible option that would alleviate certain irritants for a number of countries. Iran does not seek nuclear weapons, will not seek a nuclear weapon, and will never stockpile nuclear weapons, but the other side must pay a price in return for this, he said. Iran had been enriching uranium up to 60% purity, a short technical step away from weapons-grade levels. The International Atomic Energy Agency had said Iran was the only country in the world to enrich to that level that wasn't armed with the bomb. Iran has been refusing requests by the IAEA to inspect the sites bombed in the June war. The quantity of enriched uranium remains unknown because part of the stockpile is under rubble, and there is no initiative yet to extract it, as it is extremely dangerous, Shamkhani said. Witkoff traveling to Israel. Witkoff is expected to meet Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and other Israeli security officials on Tuesday, according to a White House official who was not authorized to comment publicly about the talks and spoke on condition of anonymity. While in Israel, Witkoff will meet with the head of the Mossad intelligence service and the Israeli military's chief of staff, according to another official who was not authorized to speak to the media and spoke on condition of anonymity. Israel is expected to ask that any agreement with Iran include removing enriched uranium from the country, stopping the enrichment of uranium, limiting the creation of ballistic missiles, and ending support for Tehran's proxies. However, Shamkhani in his interview rejected giving up uranium enrichment, a major obstacle in earlier talks with the U.S. In November, Arachi said Iran was doing no enrichment in the country because of the U.S. bombing of the nuclear sites. Witkoff later will travel to Abu Dhabi, the UAE capital, later in the week for Russia-Ukraine talks, the official said. We have talks going on with Iran. We'll see how it all works out, Trump told reporters in the Oval Office on Monday. Asked what his threshold was for military action against Iran, he declined to elaborate. I'd like to see a deal negotiated, Trump said. Right now, we're talking to them. We're talking to Iran. And if we could work something out, that'd be great. And if we can't, probably bad things would happen. Mike Pompeo, a hardliner on Iran, who served as CIA director and Secretary of State in Trump's first term, said it was unimaginable that there could be a deal. I think they may come away with some set of understandings, Pompeo said at Dubai's World Government Summit. But to think there's a long-term solution that actually provides stability and peace to this region while the Ayatollah is still in power is something I pray for but find unimaginable. Also Tuesday, a ship transiting through the Strait of Hormuz, the narrow mouth of the Persian Gulf, reported being hailed on the radio by numerous small armed vessels, the British military's United Kingdom Maritime Trade Operations Center said. There was no identifying information on the vessel, which continued into the Persian Gulf. The position of the incident appeared to be in Iranian territorial waters, where officials had warned of a naval drill by the paramilitary Revolutionary Guard in recent days. More departures at the U.S. Attorney's Office in Minnesota, AP sources say. A new wave of departures is rippling through the U.S. Attorney's Office in Minnesota, where additional federal prosecutors are leaving at a time of mounting frustration with the Trump administration's stepped-up immigration enforcement and the Justice Department's response to fatal shootings of civilians by federal agents. Two people familiar with the matter said Tuesday. The latest departures are on top of a half-dozen attorneys who left the office last month amid disagreements over the Justice Department's response to the shooting of Renee Good by an Immigration and Customs Enforcement officer. At least one supervisory agent in the FBI's Minneapolis office is known to have resigned last month as well. The Minnesota Star-Tribune reported Monday evening that 8 lawyers have since departed the office or announced plans to do so. A person familiar with the matter, who spoke on condition of anonymity to discuss non-public personnel moves, confirmed that this number was correct and that more departures were likely. Another person also confirmed a new wave of departures in the office. The office did not immediately respond to a request for comment. The resignations reflect the turbulence that has roiled the state over the last month or so, as law enforcement officials have clashed over how to respond to violent confrontations during the heightened immigration enforcement. Minnesota officials, for instance, raised alarm after federal officials blocked state investigators from accessing evidence in the Good shooting and declared that Minnesota has no jurisdiction to investigate the killing. The Justice Department also declined to open a civil rights investigation into her death. After initially saying that the Department of Homeland Security would lead the investigation into the subsequent killing of Alex Preddy by Border Patrol officers, Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche last week said the Justice Department would open a civil rights investigation. Climate change and human psychology make this U.S. cold snap feel so harsh. The brutally frigid weather that has gripped most of America for the past 11 days is not unprecedented. It just feels that way. The first quarter of the 21st century was unusually warm by historical standards, mostly due to human-induced climate change, and so a prolonged cold spell this winter is unfamiliar to many people, especially younger Americans. Because bone-shattering cold occurs less frequently, Americans are experiencing it more intensely now than they did in the past, several experts in weather and behavior said. But the longer the current icy blast lasts, sub-freezing temperatures are forecast to stick around in many places, the easier it should become to tolerate. We adapt, we get used to things. This is why your first bite of dessert is much more satisfying than your 20th bite, Hannah Perfecto, who studies consumer behavior at Washington University in St. Louis, wrote in an email. The same is true for unpleasant experiences. Day 1 of a cold snap is much more a shock to the system than day 20 is. Out of practice because of recent mild winters. Charlie Steele, a 78-year-old retired federal worker in Saugerties, New York, considers himself a lover of cold weather. In the recent past, he has gone outside in winter wearing a t-shirt and shorts, and has even walked barefoot in the snow. But this January's deep freeze is much, much colder than anything I can remember, he said. Steele's sense of change is backed up by data. There have been 4 fewer days of sub-freezing temperatures in the U.S. per year on average between 2001 and 2025 than there were in the previous 25 years, according to data from Climate Central. The data from more than 240 weather stations also found that spells of sub-freezing temperatures have become less widespread geographically and haven't lasted as long until this year. In Albany, about 40 miles from Steele, the change has been more pronounced than the national average, with 11 fewer sub-freezing days in the last 25 years than the previous quarter century. You're out of practice, Steele said. You're kind of lulled into complacency. Coldest weeks someone under 30 may have felt. Climate change has shifted what people are used to, said several climate scientists, including Daniel Swain of the University of California's Water Resources Institute. It's quite possible that for anybody under the age of 30, in some spots, this may well be the coldest week of their life, Swain said. Jennifer Francis, a climate scientist at the Woodwell Climate Research Center in Falmouth, Massachusetts, said, "Humans get used to all kinds of things: city noise, stifling heat, lies from politicians, and winter cold. So when a normal cold spell does come along, we feel it more acutely. We forgot how cold it used to be. People forget how extreme cold feels after just 2 to 8 years of milder winters," according to a 2019 study in the journal Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. Americans have gone through a much longer stretch than that. Over the past 30 years, the average daily low in the continental U.S. has dropped below 10 degrees 40 times, according to meteorologist Ryan Mew, former chief scientist for the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. But in the preceding 30 years, that chilly threshold was reached 124 times. People have forgotten just how cold it was in the 20th century, Texas A&M University climate scientist Andrew Dessler said. Their wake-up call came last month when the country's average daily low dipped below 10 degrees 3 times in 1 week. Regardless of how it feels, extremely cold weather presents dangers. People and vehicles slip on ice, power can go down, leaving people freezing in homes, and storms limit visibility, making commuting to work or even doing basic errands potentially perilous. More than 110 deaths have been connected to the winter storms and freezing temperatures since January. Shaking off our cold rustiness. As this winter's frigid days stretch on, people adapt. University of San Diego psychiatrist Thomas Rutledge said, "People shake off what he calls their weather rustiness." Rutledge explained what he meant via email, recalling the period decades ago when he lived in Alaska. "I assumed that everyone was a good driver in winter conditions. How couldn't they be with so much practice," he wrote. "But what I annually observed was that there was always a large spike in car accidents in Alaska after the first big snowfall hit. Rather than persistent skills, it seemed that the 4 to 6 months of spring and summer was enough for people's winter driving skills to rust enough to cause accidents. That's Alaska. This cold snap hit southern cities such as Dallas and Miami, where it's not just the people unaccustomed to the cold. Utilities and other basic infrastructure are also ill-equipped to handle the extreme weather," said Francis of the Woodwell Climate Research Center. While this ongoing cold snap may feel unusually long to many Americans, it isn't, according to data from 400 weather stations across the continental U.S. with at least a century of record keeping, as tracked by the Southeast Regional Climate Center. Only 33 of these weather stations have recorded enough sub-zero temperatures since the start of 2026 to be in the top 10% of the coldest first 32 days of any year over the past century. When Steele moved to the Hudson Valley as a toddler in 1949, the average daily low temperature over the previous 10 winters was 14.6 degrees. In the past 10 years, the average daily low was 20.8 degrees. As a younger man, Steele used to hunt in winter and sit for hours on cold rocks. "I could never do that now," he said. "I'm rusty. I'm out of practice." You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Toronto Star on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Trump demands $1 billion from Harvard as a prolonged standoff appears to deepen. President Donald Trump is demanding a $1 billion payment from Harvard University to end his prolonged standoff with the Ivy League campus, doubling the amount he sought previously, as both sides appeared to move further from reaching a deal. The president raised the stakes on social media Monday night, saying Harvard has been behaving very badly. He said the university must pay the government directly as part of any deal, something Harvard has opposed, and that his administration wants nothing further to do with Harvard in the future. Trump's comments on Truth Social came in response to a New York Times report saying the president had dropped his demand for a financial payment, lowering the bar for a deal. Trump denied he was backing down. Harvard officials did not immediately comment. Trump's outburst appears to leave both sides firmly entrenched in a conflict that Trump previously said was nearing an end. Last June, Trump said a deal was just days away and that Harvard had acted extremely appropriately during negotiations. He later said an agreement was being finalized that would require Harvard to put $500 million toward the creation of a series of trade schools rather than a payment to the government. That deal appears to have fallen apart entirely. In a social media post, Trump said the trade school proposal had been turned down because it was convoluted and wholly inadequate. Harvard has long been Trump's top target in his administration's campaign to bring the nation's most prestigious universities to heel. His officials have cut billions of dollars in Harvard's federal research funding and attempted to block it from enrolling foreign students after the campus rebuffed a series of government demands last April. The White House has said it's punishing Harvard for tolerating anti-Jewish bias on campus. In a pair of lawsuits, Harvard said it's being unfairly penalized for refusing to adopt the administration's views. A federal judge agreed in December, reversing the funding cuts and calling the anti-Semitism argument a smokescreen. Trump's latest escalation comes as other parts of his higher education campaign are teetering. Last fall, the White House invited 9 universities to join a compact that offered funding priority in exchange for adopting Trump's agenda. None of the schools accepted. In January, the administration abandoned its legal defense of an Education Department document, threatened to cut schools' funding over diversity, equity, and inclusion policies. When he took office for his second term, Trump made it a priority to go after elite universities that he said had been overrun by liberal thinking and anti-Jewish bias. His officials have frozen huge sums of research funding, which colleges have come to rely on for scientific and medical research. Several universities have reached agreements with the White House to restore funding. Some deals have included direct payments to the government, including $200 million from Columbia University. Brown University agreed to pay $50 million towards state workforce development groups. NASA delays astronauts' lunar trip until March after hydrogen leaks mar fueling test. NASA's long-awaited moonshot with astronauts is off until at least March because of hydrogen fuel leaks that marred the dress rehearsal of its giant new rocket. It's the same problem that delayed the Space Launch System rocket's debut 3 years ago. That first test flight was grounded for months because of leaking hydrogen. NASA announced the news Tuesday, shortly after the critical fueling test ended at Kennedy Space Center. Until the exasperating hydrogen leaks, the space agency had been targeting as soon as this weekend for humanity's first trip to the moon in more than half a century. As always, safety remains our top priority, NASA's new administrator, Jared Isaacman, said via X. We will only launch when we believe we are as ready to undertake the historic mission. Officials said the month-long delay will allow the launch team to conduct another fueling test before committing the 4 astronauts, 3 U.S. and 1 Canadian, to a lunar fly-around. The leaks cropped up early in Monday's loading operation and again hours later, ultimately halting the countdown clocks at the 5-minute mark. Launch controllers had wanted to get all the way down to a half minute in the countdown. NASA interrupted the flow of hydrogen several times in an attempt to warm up the area between the rocket and fuel lines and hopefully reseat any loose seals. But that didn't work, and neither did altering the flow of the hydrogen. Adjustments that allowed the first SLS rocket to finally soar without a crew in 2022. With their launch now off until at least March 6th, Commander Reed Wiseman and his crew were given the all-clear to emerge from quarantine in Houston. They will re-enter it 2 weeks before the next launch attempt. NASA has only a handful of days any given month to send them around the moon, the first time astronauts will have flown there since 1972. They won't land on the moon or even go into lunar orbit during the nearly 10-day mission, but rather check out life support and other vital capsule systems ahead of a moon landing by other astronauts in a few years. NASA sent 24 astronauts to the moon during the 1960s and 1970s Apollo. The new Artemis program is aiming for new territory, the moon's south polar region, and looking to keep crews on the lunar surface for much longer periods. Families suffer as Ukrainian engineers can no longer keep up with repairing infrastructure. On the edge of the Ukrainian capital, Kiev, volunteers ladle hot soup into plastic containers as residents wrapped in heavy coats queue for a meal they cannot cook at home. Yulia Dolatova, a mother of two, is among them, waiting with her 18-month-old son, Bodanchek, bundled in layers against the biting cold. Life, she says, has been reduced to the most basic essentials: warmth, light, and food. All day long, there's no electricity, no way to cook food for the kids. Pretty much everyone is in this situation, Dolatova, 37, said. She lives in Troishchina, one of Kiev's hardest-hit districts, battered by repeated Russian attacks since the full-scale Russian invasion 4 years ago. Russian strikes using drones and missiles have left hundreds of thousands of people without heat or electricity as temperatures plunge as low as minus 30 degrees Celsius or minus 22 degrees Fahrenheit. The harsh winter is expected to continue in the coming weeks. Without heat, water pipes in the district have also frozen and burst, adding to the strain on daily life. Damage to the grid and power stations is at its worst since the war began. As soon as utility and energy crews restore heating to some buildings and power engineers finally manage to set outage schedules so people know when electricity will be cut, Russia launches another strike, and the same work has to be done all over again. The hardship is compounded by the long absence of Dolatova's husband, who is fighting in the east and has seen his youngest son only twice since birth. She looks after her two sons, Bodanchek and 11-year-old Danil, and the family dog, who rarely gets out for a walk. At night, her building, a Soviet-era tower block, goes completely dark. Her toddler son has learned to grip her cell phone, flashlight on, as she manhandles his stroller up 6 flights of stairs to their apartment. The stairs have already broken 2 strollers. Inside, she flicks on battery-powered lamps one by one. Before bedtime, the two brothers huddle together for warmth, playing in silence near the frost-lined windows by flashlight. At bedtime, Dolatova insulates the bed with foam rubber, trying to keep them warm. Dolatova's husband is serving in the Zaporizhzhia area, one of the war's most volatile sectors. He should be coming soon. I live from leave to leave, Dolatova said. I wait for him. That's what keeps me going. You tell yourself, just a little longer, and he'll come. You count the days. Listening to a reading of articles and features from the Toronto Star on the Niagara Frontier radio reading service. Danish court convicts 2 Swedes of terrorism for grenade attack near Israeli embassy. A Danish court convicted 2 Swedes of terrorism and attempted murder for detonating 2 hand grenades near the Israeli embassy in Copenhagen in October 2024. The Copenhagen City Court sentenced the younger of the 2 men, aged 18, to 12 years in prison, and the older, aged 21, to 14 years in prison, according to Swedish news agency TT. They were said to be acting on behalf of a criminal gang. In the early hours of October 2, 2024, the pair threw 2 hand grenades in the direction of the Israeli embassy in the Danish capital. The devices did not reach their target, but instead detonated on the terrace of a residential building nearby, inhabited by a family with children. Nobody was injured. The explosions happened about 109 yards from the embassy, which is located in an area with other embassies, the local police said at the time. Copenhagen's Jewish school, Karolinskolen, is located down the street from the embassy, but it was closed at the time of the attack. The 2 men admitted to throwing the grenades, but said they did it for money and denied being ideologically motivated to attack an Israeli institution. The Danish court disagreed on whether the 2 should be convicted of terrorism. According to TT, 2 judges and 4 jurors concluded that the Swedes were guilty of terrorism, while 1 judge and 2 jurors disagreed. The younger of the 2 men is also facing charges in Sweden for an attack on the Israeli embassy in Stockholm just 1 day before the Danish attack, according to TT. The older also faces criminal charges in connection with another attack in Sweden. Lawyers for the 2 men said they would appeal the verdicts, which include deportation to Sweden in addition to the prison sentences. Sweden has grappled with gang violence for years. Criminal gangs often recruit teenagers in socially disadvantaged immigrant neighborhoods to carry out hits. 2 main gangs, the Foxtrot Network and its rival Rumba, have been involved in deadly feuds. Pope Leo XIV faces crisis as a traditionalist group plans bishop consecrations without consent. Pope Leo XIV is facing his first major crisis with traditionalist Catholics. A breakaway group attached to the traditional Latin Mass announced plans to consecrate new bishops without papal consent in a threatened revival of schism. The Swiss-based Society of St. Pius X, which has schools, chapels, and seminaries around the world, has been a thorn in the side of the Holy See for 4 decades, founded in opposition to the modernizing reforms of the 1960s Second Vatican Council. In 1988, the group's founder, Archbishop Marcel Lefebvre, consecrated 4 bishops without papal consent, arguing that it was necessary for the survival of the Church's tradition. The Vatican promptly excommunicated Lefebvre and the 4 other bishops, and the group today still has no legal status in the Catholic Church. But in the decades since that original break with Rome, the group has continued to grow with branches of priests, nuns, and lay Catholics who are attached to the pre-Vatican II traditional Latin Mass. For the Vatican, papal consent for the consecration of bishops is a fundamental doctrine, guaranteeing the lineage of apostolic succession from the time of Christ's original apostles. As a result, the consecration of bishops without papal consent is considered a grave threat to church unity and a cause of schism, since bishops can ordain new priests. Under church law, a consecration without papal consent incurs an automatic excommunication for the person who celebrates it and the purported new bishop. The Vatican had tried for years to reconcile with the SSPX, as the group is known, fearing the growth of a parallel church. Pope Benedict XVI in 2009 lifted the excommunications of the surviving bishops and relaxed restrictions on celebrating the Old Latin Mass in a gesture of outreach to all Catholics still attached to the old rite. But an uproar ensued after one of the SSPX bishops, Richard Williamson, publicly denied in a television interview that Jews were killed in gas chambers during World War II. Tensions heightened under Pope Francis. In the ensuing years, and especially during the pontificate of Pope Francis, tensions with traditional Catholics only deepened. Francis reversed Benedict's reform that allowed greater celebration of the Old Latin Mass, arguing it had become a source of division in the Church. Leo has acknowledged the tensions and sought to pacify the debate, expressing an openness to dialogue and allowing exceptions to Francis's crackdown. But the SSPX said in a statement Monday that it had no choice but to proceed with consecrations of new bishops July 1st to preserve the future of the society. The Reverend David Pagliarani, the SSPX Superior General, said he had written to Leo explaining the need for new bishops to ensure the continuation of the ministry of its bishops, who have been traveling the world for nearly 40 years to respond to the many faithful attached to the tradition of the Church. The SSPX said that he had received a reply from the Vatican which does not in any way respond to our requests, and was preparing to proceed with the planned consecrations given the objective state of grave necessity in which souls find themselves. The Vatican spokesman, Matteo Bruni, suggested Tuesday that the Vatican was still open to negotiations. Contacts between the Society of St. Pius X and the Holy See continue, with the aim of avoiding rifts or unilateral solutions to the issues that have arisen, Bruni said in a statement. Concern from other groups. The Old Latin Mass features readings and hymns in Latin, with the priest facing the altar, his back to the faithful in the pews. Vatican II allowed instead for Mass to be celebrated in the vernacular, with the priest facing the pews and a more active participation of the faithful. Aficionados of the ancient rite say it is a more prayerful and reverent form of worship than the new Mass ushered in by Vatican II. Two groups that celebrate the Old Latin Mass but have remained in communion with the Holy See, Una Voce International and the Latin Mass Society, expressed concern at the threatened consecrations from the SSPX. While not agreeing with all the SSPX arguments, the two groups expressed sympathy with the plight of its believers, calling for the Vatican to ultimately regularize the group's status within the Church. We urge our bishops, and above all, His Holiness Pope Leo XIV, to be mindful of these pastoral realities, which are at this moment precipitating a crisis whose consequences no one can foresee, the two groups warned. China criticizes decision to award a Grammy to the Dalai Lama. Beijing on Monday criticized the Dalai Lama's first Grammy win, describing the music industry award for an audiobook narration and storytelling as a tool for anti-China political manipulation. The Tibetan Buddhist spiritual leader, who lives in exile in India, took the award on Sunday for his book, Meditations, The Reflections of His Holiness the Dalai Lama. He said in a statement on his website that he saw the award as a recognition of our shared universal responsibility. I receive this recognition with gratitude and humility, he added. China's Foreign Ministry spokesman, Lin Jing, said, "It is well known that the 14th Dalai Lama is not merely a religious figure, but a political exile engaged in anti-China separatist activities under the guise of religion. We firmly oppose the relevant party using the award as a tool for anti-China political manipulation," he added. The Dalai Lama, who is seen by many as the face of Tibet's struggle for autonomy, has lived in exile since 1959, when Chinese troops crushed an uprising in the Tibetan capital of Lhasa. China, which governs Tibet as an autonomous region, has been accused of trying to stamp out the Tibetan language, culture, and identity. Beijing and the Dalai Lama also spar over the spiritual leader's eventual successor. Tibetan Buddhists believe the Dalai Lamas are reincarnations of a spiritual leader first born in 1391. Beijing maintains the next Dalai Lama will be born in Tibet and recognized by the ruling Communist Party, whereas the Dalai Lama has said his successor will be from a free country and that China has no role in the process. You've been listening to a reading of articles and features from the February 3rd issue of the Toronto Star. Your reader has been Brian. Thank you for listening.